I'll just mirror my screen. Oops. 1 second. Oh. Just got to mirror my screen just a second. Okay, that was a really cool demo. I'm Ross Goodwin, and I'm an artist working with, I'm just gonna take this out. I'm an artist working with machine learning and text and poetry and all sorts of text. And I'll get into who I am and how I got where I am and what I make. But I want to start this with a little game, and I call this game Actual English Word or Invented Gibberish. So I'm going to show you a series of words and definitions, and you're going to tell me if they're real or fake. The first one is Bicarotate, a salt or ester of bicyclic acid. So who thinks this is a real word? Raise your hand. Okay, a few people. Who thinks this is fake? Most people. Yeah, it's fake. Pleborical, consisting of leaves and plants of the pea family. Who thinks this is real? Raise your hand. Who thinks this is fake? It's about half and half. But it's fake, I fooled you. And then tautology, real, like everyone. Fake, like one person. It's real. That went by a little too fast. Real. Logistant, last one. Real, like nobody. Fake, like everybody. Yeah, I can't fool you guys. It's fake. Or can I? Because you might be asking yourself, was that the real definition of tautology? The study of the development of moral principles in the mind. That is not. Despite the etymology and the word endings, the real definition of tautology is the saying of the same thing twice over in different words, generally considered to be a fault of style. I'm just curious, how many people notice that? Like nobody. It's hilarious. Nobody ever notices. So you may be asking yourself, where did these fake definitions come from? Well, they came from this Twitter bot I made called Lexiconjure. It's a little defunct now. Unfortunately, you can't tweet words at it anymore, and it's sort of dead. But it was up for a long time, a couple years. And one of my favorite definitions it ever came up with was this one here for love, which is a result of a person's or animal's response to a problem or difficulty. She loved the music of the new employee. Another definition it came up with for love was past tense of leave, which is really clever. So I really loved this bot, and it sort of felt like almost like a pet or something, like an animal that could parrot back plausible definitions for real words and plausible definitions for invented words in the context of real words. And what this is it was a long short-term memory recurrent neural network trained on the Oxford English Dictionary. Basically LSTM, which I'll get into, or a long short-term memory recurrent neural network, which is a huge mouthful, is like a pattern recognition machine in the linear sense, in that it goes letter by letter or word by word and always predicts the next letter or next word given what came before. But you can be very clever with systems like these and give it, say, in English, or a sentence in English, and then a sentence in French. And these machines are actually smart enough to translate between languages, as well as do simple pattern completions. So in this case, it's translating from the word to the definition. There's like a delineator character in between them in the training data. And when I give it a word plus the delineator, even if it's a word the machine has never seen before, it's able to complete that into a plausible definition. I really love training these algorithms, and this is sort of what I see when I'm training them. I started out doing this in graduate school at NYU ITP, which is like art school for engineers or engineering school for artists at NYU, Tisch School of the Arts. And I got access to NYU's high-performance compute facility to do this with, and had GPUs that are actually now, just 5 years later, already totally outdated, but at the time were devastatingly expensive to use on AWS or other places. So having that resource was really incredible, and I was able to train some relatively large models on single GPUs, which is sort of, now people are doing TPUs and multi-GPUs. It's sort of gotten really, really advanced in terms of this type of training. But I was sort of there near the beginning of these algorithms starting to work well. So I was able to do some really interesting experiments. So again, how it works is it completes a sentence or completes something. So you have the meaning of life is, and it completes it to the meaning of life is a perfect version of the proper form, the concept of poetry, referring to the result of the possession of life and strength and pride, and the accurate condition of the story and the consequences of the poem until the moment is not enough for the life of a man to find a secret of unexpected maternity. And that's a bit of a run-on, to say the least. And it's from sort of an early version of one of the models I was training. But you can also ask these models questions. So I asked it, where did you grow up? And it said I didn't have to do that. That was a model trained on movie scripts and movie dialogue, which is great. You can get that on this website called Subscene, which is for the deaf community. It has a credible database of subtitle tracks. There's also the Cornell Movie Scripts database. There's a lot of great open databases of movie scripts and dialogue. You know, poetry as well. So that was what I really wanted to do. And this was one of the first like good poems I was able to make using these machines. This is curated from a very large sample, but and still I saw the Brooklyn stairs with the shit, the ground, the golden haze of the frozen woods where the boat stood when I thought of shame and silence. I won't read the whole thing. I'll just, because I want to get through everything I have here and do a little demo. So you can see though that the language is interesting. It conjures imagery, and that's sort of where I wanted to be with this. I think that language that can conjure imagery can take us places that we don't expect, and even if it's machine generated, even if it's quote unquote meaningless, it can still inspire us in ways that we don't expect. So again, back to movie scripts. In 2016, I generated a movie script and made a movie with Oscar Sharp and Thomas Middleditch and a couple other amazing actors called Sunspring, and it's on YouTube. And we generated not only dialogue, but the action sequences. So in this one, the direction was he takes his eye from his mouth. And this is just like a wonderfully surreal scene and one of my favorite in the movie. But actually, I don't like it as much as I like this scene, which is the direction was he pulls the camera toward his back. So we have the actor actually pulling on the camera itself. He's on the phone, but then the camera angle changes and he's holding nothing. And to me, that sort of demonstrates this wonderful dialogue we can have with the machine, this cycle of generation and interpretation, because while the pulling on the camera was a literal interpretation of the screenplay, this angle change and he's holding nothing, that's informed by years of filmmaking experience on the production crew's part, and they really knocked this project out of the park in terms of the acting and the production. So that's what really made this whole thing work. But this is on YouTube. It's called Sunspring. It's 9 minutes long, and there were 2 sequels as well, which I won't get into, but one of them has David Hasselhoff in it. Another project I made around the same time as that film, I was experimenting with other ways of encapsulating these machines, and I made this project called word.camera. And what it is it's a camera, a physical camera, and you take a photo, and in real time it generates a poem from the photo you take and prints it out on a receipt printer like a text Polaroid. And this is the first one I made, and I've made a bunch of these. This is me holding sort of a backpack version of this that I made at one point that I would walk around New York City with and sort of generate these long scripts of poetry, generated poetry, with these ASCII images on the top, and I really love this form factor. Here's another version of it. This was at installation at Phi Center in Montreal, and you know, people's just interaction with this machine gave me a lot of inspiration moving forward. I loved especially watching kids use it because adults would have so much trouble. I think most people have seen like image captioning machines at this point, but this was like 2015, 2016 when they were relatively new or were ones that were working well, and people hadn't really seen that before, hadn't seen a computer do that, or a lot of people hadn't. But adults would, you know, kind of puzzle over how the thing worked, whereas kids would just, a poem about me, and, you know, run off with it. So I really loved that aspect of it. Other devices I made, I wanted to make something based on location. So I started working on this compass, and it ended up being this sort of center console for our car, and it generates text using GPS locations in real time. And then the final piece in this trio, which was for my thesis in grad school, was a clock. Hopefully this loads. Uh-oh, there we go. So, and this will sort of demonstrate how all the pieces worked. So it's a punch clock, an early 20th century punch clock. And what you do is you pick a SD card from the library of neural network models. I trained a bunch of them. And then you put that into the SD card slot, kind of like a video game cartridge. And then there's a user interaction. In this case, you have to like punch in, like you're punching in for work. And then the machine generates a poem for you based on the time. So we have time, location, and imagery. And this is what that poem ended up being in this case. So the time was 2 minutes past midnight. The corridor was a long corridor, and the shadows, and the whole thing was the same as a wall, and the door slanted from the line of the wall. So you'll notice this is still a little choppy, but it conjures imagery. As you'll see in a sec, the quality of this stuff has improved dramatically with the advent of new types of models like GPT-3 and BERT out of Google. So this is all three devices together for the only time they were ever displayed together, which was really great. So now I want to get into my background a little bit and how I sort of got to this stuff. So I used to be a ghostwriter, not that kind of ghostwriter. This all started when I was in undergrad at MIT, and I started working for this guy named Noam Chomsky as a research aide. And that got me really interested in politics and language, for obvious reasons if you know Chomsky's work. And I ended up working on the Obama campaign in 2008, writing letters. And this is me. This is a picture I took on November 4th, 2008, when Obama won. That was election day. And then I ended up, my first job out of college, fortunately enough, through a lot of networking and back and forth, I was able to get a job at the White House. At first writing like greeting cards, but then writing presidential proclamations, which are like statements of national days, weeks, and months of things. So this was Obama's first Thanksgiving Day proclamation, which I was really happy to have drafted, even though I forgot to mention God directly. So Chuck Norris wrote a really scathing op-ed of this. That's another story entirely. So after working at the White House and having that really fun job writing proclamations, I was really young and I wanted to get closer to the action. So I went to the Treasury Department. Here's my cameo in the background of a documentary about the Treasury building. That was a really different experience. I came in wanting to be a speechwriter for Tim Geithner, and I got to do a little bit of that, but I mostly was making binders and briefing binders. And through that automation of making those binders, I started learning to code and getting really interested in natural language processing and natural language generations. That's sort of where it all started. But before I really became a full-time programmer, I did a little more ghostwriting. I did some evil stuff like this set of letters for the Forest Service that I'm sure they just recycled, saying we needed this mine. And this is one of the things you can get caught up in if you're not careful as a ghostwriter, just like working for unsavory interest groups. And it's really not great. But the job didn't pay well, but I found a way to make it pay well because I found a way to cheat. And I did that by making this method in a spreadsheet where I'd write all the letters in chunks. So I'd write all the first paragraphs, then all the second paragraphs, then all the third paragraphs, and all the fourth paragraphs. And then I'd randomize the order of them, or I had a way of randomizing the paragraphs and editing them a little bit to turn that in as a new batch of letters the next day. So I took an 8-hour-a-day job, turned it into a 2-hour-a-day job, and that gave me time to work on other stuff, like making a novel that never got finished, which you can see remnants of here. But I turned this into a creative writing game called the Diagonalization Argument, based off of George Cantor's 1893 proof. And if you get that, you're much nerdier than me. But the Diagonalization Argument, how it works is you write in diagonals. So each player is assigned a diagonal. And you can play with 2 to n players, and you sort of complete the story in sequences of those diagonals, and you can only write next to or below a paragraph that's already been written, and it sort of goes in turns. So it's sort of a way of doing an exquisite corpse novel in a non-linear way. And I thought I was onto something really fresh and new, but it turns out this has been done for years and years and years. And this is a project from Oulipo, or the Ouvroir de littérature potentielle. It's called 100,000 million billion poems or something like that. I don't remember the exact French translation, but this is from the 60s, and this is what I'm showing here is sort of a modern HTML version of it, but it's a poem that can be rearranged deliberately and to create lots of different versions. And Oulipo and lots of other groups have done this sort of work for years. Computational literature is not a new thing. I mean, it's 20th century, and then there are roots that are a bit older that you can trace, but it's definitely not a last 10 years or even last 20 years. It's something that's been studied and explored for at least a century at this point. So this was a project. I'm just going to go through a few more projects and then I'll do a demo. This was a project I did with Google's Deep Dream, where they asked me to title. This was actually at Gray Area in 2016. It was in this very room. They had a Deep Dream art show, and they asked me to entitle some of the works with my image, word camera image captioner thing. So this was one I really liked. It was the heart of a monk, and I think it really represents the sort of cellular nature of the image. As you might expect, I kept going with the image location and time thing, and I ended up making this project called Word Car, but that wasn't the final title of it. And it was done with Google's Artist and Machine Intelligence program. But what it was I drove this Cadillac from New York to New Orleans, and it had a camera on the back and a microphone inside and a GPS on the roof and then a clock. And all of those elements fed into the computer that was in the back seat with me and printed out a novel in the back seat as we drove, generated from the trip itself. So this was an experiment about writing a book with a car as the pen. And that's really what I'm interested in, is exploring, like, what can we use as a pen or a writing instrument in this day and age, and what can we do mediated with this technology. So the book ended up getting published in France, and it's called Won the Road. They wanted me to call it On the Road, but I thought Won the Road was a good compromise, because one means on a computer. It's available on Jean Boit's website. That's the publisher. But yeah, I'm really pleased with how this turned out. The designer did an amazing job. We have the ASCII images sort of correspond with the text. And it's a really interesting book. It has characters, which I didn't expect to happen. It has a lot of interesting scenes. But it is a little choppy compared to what's possible now. But it really got me into this thought of, like, what is a road, like, what is a journey, what is a story, how do these things interrelate? Because if you think about, like, what a road is fundamentally, it's one of the oldest and most significant inventions that humans have created. Roads will last longer than pretty much anything else we make. And we know that because we still use roads that the Romans used, but not many of us speak Latin anymore. And, you know, a road is also a fractal pattern, which is a pattern that we see everywhere in nature. And if you learn about fractals, you'll start seeing them literally everywhere. But they create these wonderful fractal patterns in the form of our cities and our urban grids. And it really got me thinking about, you know, what is that? How does that relate to storytelling and stories? Well, stories are fractals too. You can always add an extra sentence. You can always add an extra word. You can always add an extra paragraph, or at whatever level of granularity you want. You can always add extra detail. And, you know, there's ways of constructing stories that involve starting with a single sentence and then expanding it into 2 sentences and then 3 and then 6 and so on. So this is a snowflake fractal, if you were curious, one of the earliest fractals described. And it also got me thinking about, like, shorelines, and, like, this is also, shorelines are fractal surfaces. It's impossible to measure the exact length of a shoreline, and in a way, as a result, it's impossible to measure the exact length of any given journey, for example. You can always measure an extra grain of sand. There's always more detail to be discovered in anything. So what's the destination with all of this? This is the Further bus from the Merry Pranksters, and that was one of the inspirations for my project. I really got a lot of inspiration from Ken Kesey's, like, electric Kool-Aid acid test experiments, and just what I wanted to do was replace the acid with AI. And I think I accomplished that, and I have more planned in the future. So this is another big project from 2018 called Please Feed the Lions that I did with Es Devlin. And this one was really, the historical context hit me really hard when I was there installing it. And what it was we added a 5th lion sculpture to Trafalgar Square in London for a week during the London Design Festival. And this lion was day-glow red, like a digital object kind of come to life. And you could feed it a word and it would roar back a poem generated in its mouth, and then at night projected all over its body and up Nelson's column behind it. And just watching the city of London interact with this was an absolutely incredible experience. Definitely one of the coolest projects I've ever worked on. And then, yeah, this is sort of the next version of that, which I had less of a hand in. This is the Poetry Pavilion that went up this year, I think, in Dubai as part of the Expo 2020. And it's more of a poem that you could walk through. This is also Es Devlin's work with my input. And this one was really incredible. It was the British government's pavilion, so it was funded by the British government, and it was a giant architectural installation. You can see photos of the real thing online. But yeah, absolutely incredible project as well. But projects like this can also be really small. So this is something from, does anybody know what NaNoGenmo is? It's like NaNoWriMo, but you have to generate a 50,000 word novel every November. And there's also something called NaNoGenmo, which is where you have to generate a 50,000 word novel with code that can only fit into a tweet. And this is my project from a couple years ago. And what it is it takes, you can also use arbitrary text. So it takes an arbitrary text and it inserts words in between every word that have to do with the alliteration scheme of the word that precedes them. So it kind of creates these poetic fragments, run-ons. But I just wanted to show that work like this can be small and big, and it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be still to be interesting from a poetic perspective. Another project, Unasked Questions. This is a deck of cards with generated questions on them that are filtered through Google for uniqueness. I spent a couple years collecting like every question on Ask Reddit and a few other sources and trained a neural net on those. And then, like I said, filtered them through Google search to make sure I only had the ones that hopefully weren't like asked in their exact form online before. So this one may have been asked since, but this is from a couple years ago. But one of my favorite ones that came out of this was, what did you think you were doing on the internet but turned out not to be? So one more project before I get into the demo, which is this album, Chain Tripping, with the band Yacht. I had a hand in the lyrical creation, and it got nominated for a Grammy, which was absolutely amazing. Again, these projects where I've partnered with somebody with a different skill set, I've always gotten something out of it that's much greater than the sum of its parts. In this case, an album. There's also the film, and then the sculpture, and you know, all of these projects have involved partnerships, and I think that's one of the things that makes this type of work really interesting. Language can filter into almost any aspect of art in different ways. So just before I go to the demo, this is my agenda, just in 5 bullet points. The word robot means slave in check. Sci-fi is a mirror, not a prescription. What I mean by that is that you know, what makes for a really entertaining, interesting story in science fiction doesn't necessarily make for a great reality. So we have to ask ourselves, like, what kind of reality do we want to live in? What do we want the role of AI to be? It's not inherently a military technology. It's not inherently human-shaped. I really hate it when people like Peter Thiel say that AI is inherently a military technology, or when people like Elon Musk are like kind of geared toward creating this human-shaped version of it, when in reality, I think that devalues our relationships with one another and, you know, could create all sorts of problems in the future. So again, an entertaining or meaningful story is not the same as a desirable future. And when we're working with these technologies, what I'm trying to do, working with these technologies, is to ask questions and demonstrate what this can do in sort of a playful context, so that people can ask this question of what kind of future do we actually want? Do we want AI telling us what to do all day? Do we want it firing guns, or do we want it making poetry, or augmenting our creativity in various ways? So that's all for my talk. I want to show you a quick poetry generating demo. I guess I still have plenty of time, so maybe we can do a couple. So does somebody have a title and a keyword they'd like to see generated into a poem? This is a model I trained using GPT-3. It's kind of incredible how far this stuff has come. Just because in 2016, I was having to, not write the code myself from scratch, but run people's code on machines myself. And now there's just an API that OpenAI has, and you can just fine tune the latest and greatest LSTM recurrent neural network for a couple dollars with whatever corpus you want to try. So this is one I did pretty recently, but I was hoping somebody might have a title and a keyword. Yes?
Love is blind, keyword.
Okay, perfect. And this isn't the largest model, so it might take me like 2 tries to get a poem here, but when it works really well. Okay, here we go. Love is blind, and he aches for you, who forget him, who stay apart. He does not say, I speak to you. He does not say, I need to be near. I have no idea what this is going to say, by the way. He does not say, I wait with longing, or I wait despite you. Love is blind, and he aches for you, who stay apart, who forget him. He does not hurt for you. He does not care. He does not ask, and he does not require in order to keep his pleasure. This is kind of creepy. Love is blind, and he aches for you, who forget him, who stay apart. His pleasure is his pain. His pleasure is his need. His need is his fear. So you never know where these are going to go. Love is blind, and he aches for you, who forget him. That's kind of like a Hellraiser quote right there. I'm thinking like Cenobites. Who forget him and stay apart. He does not ask, and he does not require. He does not hurt for you or wait. Love is blind, and he aches for you, who forget him, who stay apart. I give that like a 5 out of 10. Let's try one more. Does somebody else have a title and a keyword? That will not work. I don't think. We could try it. I think it's going to throw an error, though. Do you have an emoji that you'd like me to use?
There's this symbols emoji. Like, it's in the categories under symbols, but it is that emoji.
Which emoji?
Press symbols emoji.
Symbols.
Yeah.
Oh, I see it. I see it. Okay, let's see what happens. It might work. It is trained in Unicode, so I don't think there's any emoji in the corpora, but it might do something weird. Let's see. Do you have a keyword, another emoji, maybe? All right, let's do green heart. Why not? Just because that's right there. I don't think this is going to work, so don't get your hopes up, but it might do something amazing. Who knows? Oh, here we go. It worked. Forgetfulness, formlessness, the profoundest ignorance everywhere reigns. The unbought, the unasked for, the power that rules without a name. The vast, the unspeakable, the eternal, the infit, the formless, the vague, the formless, the vague. Forgetfulness, formlessness, the profoundest ignorance, the unbought, the unasked for, the power that rules without a name. I kind of like that one. Yeah, I'll do a different one, so I can run it again. Oh, this one's really long. I can send these to Thorsten, and we can maybe you can share them on the website or something. I don't know, but it's saving them in the background, so I do have these on my computer. But that one is really long. I'll just kind of scroll through it real quick so you all can read. This emoji idea was great. Thank you for that. Wow. Okay. Anybody else? Do we have time? Okay, great. Anybody else? Title, keyword? Yep.
Keyword booking. Title, look at all these things.
Amazing. All right, let's try it. So just so you know, the more unique of a keyword you pick, the better it'll kind of work, because the way this works in the background is that the corpus is sorted by TF-IDF keyword. TF-IDF means term frequency inverse document frequency, and it's sort of called the algorithm that runs the world because it's how most search engines work. at a fundamental level. But what it does is you're taking the amount of times a word appears in a document divided by the inverse of the amount of times it appears in the whole corpus. So you want to know like how important is a word in that particular document. So if a word appears a lot in one document but not in the rest of the corpus, you know that it is important to the meaning and place of that particular document. So sorry, it was a line of ants. Look at all these ants. Okay, illustration by Woody Woodpecker. Let's try that again. That was what I was talking about more than one attempt is sometimes necessary. All right, here we go. Look at all these ants marching on the kitchen table. They're everywhere, and no place has a single one. Why are they here, and why are they so happy? Why are they marching? They don't even understand, and they don't even know that you can smile, and that you can smile, and that you can smile, that you can smile, and that you can smile. Wow. I like that one. Thank you. So one thing I'll note is that with prior versions of this model or this type of work I've done where it's like generating a poem from a title and a keyword, the model was sort of only sometimes able to integrate the title and the keyword completely. Often the spirit of it would be filtered through, but it wouldn't like repeat the title and repeat the keyword the way it does here. So it's really nice to see this working in the way that it's intended, and it just keeps getting better and better with every generation of the technology. Okay, one more maybe? Yeah. Simulacrum. Okay, I like that one, simulacrum.
And the title is Song of Myself.
Song of... Yeah, Song of Myself. I cry, and yet I sleep. Waking, I weep, and yet I dream. Till the baby's breath shall cease, and blue-eyed baby smile to hear the night wind sing in the trees. And the bird shall rise in the tree, and the bird shall rise and sing no more, and the mother shall forget to mourn, for it was I that was dead. Oh yes, I was dead, but now I hear the night wind in the trees. I see the little blue-eyed smile in the baby's deep blue eyes, and I hear the little baby sing, and I hear the mother sighing, and I hear the father's voice no more, for it was I that was dead. Okay, interesting. All right, thanks everybody. Should we stop there? Yeah, any questions? Let's do some questions. Yeah, I do sometimes. I think every writer should write poetry all the time, no matter what they do. It's just an important way of remembering that language has these qualities that aren't always apparent in sort of our literal usage of it every day or in business documents or emails. It has these wonderful qualities that only really come out in poetry. So I think everyone should write poetry all the time. Yeah. I have done that. I'm not really a music or sound person per se, but I've done a few experiments pairing poetry with sound and images for that matter. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I do. I haven't in a little while just because I've been a little bit out of it. I've had some medical issues in the last few years, unfortunately. So I haven't developed much new work super recently, but I'm sort of getting back into it now. I don't know which model I would want to train now. There's so many out there that you can do. There's GPT-J, there's BERT, and I think new versions of BERT have emerged as well that I don't remember the names of. But there are definitely many open source versions of the same kind of technology. I'm not the kind of person who would write it from scratch, though. That's just not my forte.
A question just for the stream as well. That last, what do you say again, sorry?
Oh, the last program, does it take proper names? Like if you put someone's name in there, would it still, does it have to be a word?
No, names work as well. The keyword thing, I think, it excludes proper names, but it would work. The capitalization, it's expecting a lowercase word, there. So the capitalization would matter. It would do something. We can try it if you want. But maybe there's another question, I don't know. Yep.
A lot of language in daily use, especially on the internet, has a lot of like grammar breakage, a lot of slang, and also
Can you repeat that?
a lot of language in daily use, especially like on the internet, breaks a lot of grammar rules and like academic language. So if you were to train a model that kind of mirrored like casual slang, I guess, or like different colloquialisms, like how would you be able to adapt it so that if you like truncated a word to a letter or like switched around grammatical usage, would that be possible or would it be too difficult to mirror?
I think it all depends. So how these models are trained is GPT-3 and other models like are trained on massive, massive swaths of the internet. Then what I do and what a lot of practitioners do is something fine-tuning where you retrain that base model on usually a much smaller corpus. So it would all depend on what you trained that smaller corpus on. It really does adapt to that really finely. So it's almost like taking a block of clay and molding it into another shape. It's actually impossible even to get back to the original model after you fine-tuned it. So I would say, yeah, I mean, I think it's totally possible to replicate any kind of language. It just depends on where you would get the corpus. So if you're training on Urban Dictionary, you're gonna get those kinds of results. If you're training on Reddit comments, you're gonna get those kinds of results. If you're training on poetry or literature or novels, you're gonna get different qualities of text. And there's also sort of a memory window in play. So like things that are shorter tend to work a little better in general. But yeah, you can even write computer code.
Have you had, is this on? Have you had any issues with bias in your data sets and the results you get?
That's
like,
a great question.
Okay.
So bias is like the big looming pariah of machine learning, and it's really justifiably so because it's this thing that affects all forms of machine learning. And when we say bias, we mean like, you know, various different types of it, but in general, like when you're compiling a data set to train an algorithm with, your bias is feeding into that algorithm, even if you think it's not. What you choose to include and exclude from data sets, if I made a poetry data set that was only white men from the 19th century, it would sound quite different than the one I showed you today, which is mostly modern poetry. But the most clear like bias story I can tell you is from that bot Lexiconger. It's pretty disturbing actually. So you wouldn't think of like the Oxford English Dictionary necessarily as being like a super biased document. But I had this early result where this friend of mine put in the word, I can't even remember what it was. I'm trying to remember. It doesn't matter. But the machine interpreted it as a slur, and the definition was like a stupid black person, which I was really uncomfortable with. And it caused me to completely question the whole project and shut it down for a long time while I sort of investigated that. But what really kind of struck me about that was that it would be pretty much impossible, I'm guessing, to make the machine say a stupid white person or a stupid white man or whatever. In this case, we're really uncovering the inherent bias of the document that the machine was trained on, in that there are a lot more definitions for slurs related to minorities than there are for slurs related to the majority. And as a result, you know, you get these unexpected snippets of text. I've also, I've seen slurs come up in output before, especially training on hip hop. That is an obvious one, but like you wouldn't expect it necessarily after training on like music lyrics just generally, but you do get it. So I filter that stuff out, but things like the slur that came out of Lexiconger, I think that's much more deep and insidious and sort of reflects bias on the whole of the language, which is really fascinating, but also kind of horrifying.
I think we have time for one more. Any others? Oh, hi.
Do you have?
Oh, next project. I want to do another version of Won the Road with a balloon. That's one, and I think it's going to be called To the Air. that's one that I've been thinking about for a long time. So I'd like to launch like a weather balloon that has a narration system on board and have it sort of narrate that journey up into the sky and back down again. That's one project. I'm still working on unasked questions. That hasn't come out yet. But yeah, I'm really trying to recontextualize my practice. As the technology gets better, it becomes harder to find the sort of surreal in-between qualities of the text that I think I found compelling at first. Now it almost reads like, I guess, a simulacrum of a human writer, which is kind of fascinating, kind of horrifying, and kind of just different at the same time. And it definitely changes my approach, and I'm not sure exactly how yet, but I know it does. So in short, I'm just developing new projects, and I'm not sure where they're going yet, but I'll find out.
Do you have like a dream data set that you'd like to use at some point?
Oh yeah, I have a lot of them. I mean, like, my dream data set is just having unlimited access to the Google Search API, which very few people really have. That would allow me to do all sorts of filtering like I did with unasked questions, which really, you can do really clever things if you had access to that, like filter sentence by sentence for originality, for sensicality. If something is not on the internet, it probably either doesn't make sense or it's quite original. So, you know, you have these, you have things like that, but then there's also like, just, you know, some of these huge proprietary image data sets I'd love to train on. I'd love to train on the Library of Congress, and I've talked to them about doing that. Copyrighted material is where it's at. Public domain stuff is really biased because it's mostly from the 19th century and earlier, and it's full of racist nonsense. So I really don't like just, when I use like things like Project Gutenberg, I like to take slices of the entire data set rather than trying to like handpick things. So like if I was training a model, which I did it before on like art paragraphs or just wanted to talk about art, I might like do a TF-IDF search across all of Project Gutenberg, only train on paragraphs or sections of text that have things about art in them, and not other things that I would filter for. So that's one approach that I found works on a lot of big data sets, and I'd love to have access to bigger ones like the Library of Congress or you know, Google Books. There's lots of ones that are kind of off limits that I'd love to try.
Okay, thanks so much, Ross.
Thank you.
That's been wonderful.